The Other Wes Moore is the dramatic true story of two boys with the same name but very different fates. One, Wes Moore, became the first African-American Rhodes Scholar from Johns Hopkins University. The other, serving a life sentence in prison in connection with the murder of a police officer. The other, Wes Moore, went to Oxford, the White House, and Wall Street, and along the way did a tour of duty in Afghanistan. Over the years, he was haunted by the memory of the other man with his name and wanted to know how could two boys with similar backgrounds end up so very different. The Other Wes Moore is that story. The book has been called a moving exploration of roads not taken. Both men have met and formed a bond, and what the author learned was that they have more in common than they know. Hi, Wes.
Hello, pleasure to be here. Thank you.
What an interesting story.
Thank you so much.
We were talking before the segment about just little shifts in life experience can result in huge differences in how lives turn out.
And it's true, and I saw it so much when I learned, the more I learned about the other Wes Moore, and in fact I felt it so strongly. It's on the cover of the book where it says the chilling truth is that his story could have been mine, and the tragedy is that my story could have been his, and just how little separates us from another life altogether.
When did you first become aware of the other Wes Moore?
I first learned about him, I was actually in South Africa on a study abroad program when I was a student at Johns Hopkins. And my mother called me and she said, I've got something crazy to tell you. She said, there are wanted posters all over your neighborhood for Wes Moore, for wanted for the murder of a police officer. And if you see him, do not approach because he's assumed to be armed and very dangerous. And that was the first time that I even learned about the other Wes Moore. And then as I came back to the United States, I read more articles about this case because I mean, this was a very big deal because this was a 13-year veteran of the police force that was killed, a father of 5, who had triplets. And the only reason he was even working at the jewelry store that day was because he was trying to make extra money for his family. But the more I learned about the other Wes Moore, the more I realized that we had so much more in common than just our name. We were living in the same neighborhood. We both came from single-parent households. We both had troubles in school and also in our neighborhoods growing up. And so that's what really, it haunted me to the point that I wanted to learn more, and I eventually reached out to him.
And how long did it take from that first awareness of the other Wes Moore to finally having a sit down with him?
It took a few years because it was something that I thought would go away. And this curiosity and this haunting feeling I felt, but eventually it didn't. So I said, I'm gonna write him a note. I'll write him a letter. I don't know if he'll ever write back, but I'll at least take the first step and write him a letter. And so I did. And a month later, I get an envelope back from Jessup Correctional Institution from Wes Moore. And in that letter, the first thing he said was, he thanked me for writing because he said, when you're in prison, you think the whole world doesn't think you exist anymore. And then he proceeded to answer all of the questions that I asked him. And that one letter turned into dozens of letters, and those dozens of letters turned into dozens of visits, and really created the foundation for the book, The Other Wes Moore.
So now you have a personal connection with the other Wes Moore.
I do. And there were so many things that I learned about the process. And even as I went through the process, never can I forget why he's there, the crime that was committed. I mean, my heart goes out to the police officer's family, and I make it very clear in the book that the only victims that day were the police officer and his family and the survivors. But I realized that there was a larger truth to be understood. I realized there was a bigger story to be explained, and really helping society understand that this story is about much more than just these two boys.
What are some of the bigger societal issues that you point out in the book and that many Black Americans may know, but is really evident in this story of the two of you?
Well, one thing I think is very clear, it helps to show us our potency as individuals in helping to change, in order to change societies, in order to change destinies. I think so many times we'll look at young kids or we'll look at communities and we'll just kind of push them off and think, well, that's not my business, there's nothing I can do to get involved. And it's just wrong, because it helps to explain our potency. Because had it not been for mentors and role models and my family and people stepping into my life, even when I didn't want them there, even when I was given every reason in the world to be like everyone else and cast me off, had it not been for that significant and aggressive and creative intervention, that my life could have been very different. And I'm very thankful for that.
There was a point in your life when your mother had to give you some tough love, and I love that story. Tell that story.
She sure did. She'd been threatening me with military school ever since I was 8 years old. And every year went by, and she kept on threatening me, and I just kept on blowing it off. And then finally, when I was 12 years old, she said, "You're going." And
why? Were you being sent to military school?
Well, I was having some issues in the classroom, issues in the neighborhood, and so I was on academic and disciplinary probation at my school. I was at that point getting in trouble in the neighborhood as well, and it was also I was coming up in a time in New York where it was just a historically chaotic and violent time, and I found myself getting caught up in this very quickly. And so my mother said, "That's enough." And so she actually sent me off to a military school, to Valley Forge Military Academy in Pennsylvania, where I went for a mandatory year. And she actually ended up coupling dollars from friends and coworkers and family to eventually get what it took in order to send me to the school. And I hated it. I mean, I ran away 5 times in the first 4 days from that school. But finally, eventually, I started to understand that I was part of something bigger than myself. I started to understand accountability. I started to understand leadership. And I started to understand what it meant to actually go through this process, and that I wasn't alone. That the fears and the apprehensions I had were not justified, because I had people there who were there to support me. And that's when I think my life started to make a turn. And
it was an emotional sacrifice, financial sacrifice on,
yes.
on the part of your mom, but a pivotal point in your life. And the other Westmore, unfortunately, for whatever reason, didn't have that pivot point at that stage in his life.
That's right, and many of the pivot points that Wes had were pivot points in the wrong direction. There were many anecdotes. There's one anecdote in particular that even as Wes got involved inside of drugs, and by the time Wes was 15, he was picked up on attempted murder charges, and he decided that that school wasn't for him. But then he went to the Job Corps. And at the Job Corps, he got his GED. At the Job Corps, he started learning skills. And there's a scene in the book where he's actually back in the community working several odd jobs. But at that point, he had 4 children. At that point, none of the jobs were steady. And the only consistency in his life was inconsistency. And so what does he do? He reverts right back to going back into the drug game. And so you see how these small decisions that we make in life, positive or negative, can have such big impacts, not just on our lives, but on the lives of so many other people.
You've had opportunity through your education at Johns Hopkins, Rhodes Scholar, traveled around the country, around the world. Yeah. From a global view, what do you see as solutions so that folks like the other Westmore don't end up in a bad circumstance?
One of the things I'm most proud of about this book is actually at the end of the book. Because at the end of the book, we have over 200 organizations around the country that are working with communities and working with at-risk youth and just youth all over the country, period. And really the people on the ground doing the work. And so I'm very proud of the partnerships that I've created with them, because a common perception is that no one's doing it, that no one cares, and it's just fundamentally not true. And in addition to that, a significant portion of the proceeds from this book are actually going towards 2 nonprofit organizations. One is an organization called City Year, which actually supports kids and gives them a year.
Started right here in Boston.
Started right here in Boston. And the other one is the U.S. Dream Academy, which supports children of the incarcerated, so kids who have one or both parents behind bars. So one thing I firmly believe is that many of the solutions that we have, whether it be the role of role models and mentors, the role of education in our lives, the roles of solid parenting and having parents who use leverage, they're out there and there are people that are doing it. The question is, how are we identifying it and how are we scaling it to make sure that these changes can actually happen on a wide-scale level?
All right, Westmore, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for your service in Afghanistan.
I appreciate it. Bless you. Thank you.
Okay. Everybody, when we come back, we're going to meet Marvin Gilmore. He's a New Englander who's receiving the French Medal of Honor. We'll tell you why just after this.